Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. I'd like to say hello and welcome to everyone. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to the NSF Virtual Grants Conference. Before we begin, we'd like to take a poll to find out a little bit more about you. If you're using Zoom from a desktop browser, you may not be able to access the poll. For best results, you want to make sure that you're viewing this presentation from the Zoom application. So we've arranged for the entire NSF Grants Conference to take place this year online with over 2 weeks worth of webinars for the research community with no more than 2 sessions per day. All of these sessions have been pre-recorded. However, we will be taking live Q&A both throughout the recorded session and at the end for a live Q&A session. For information about the sessions and our speakers, please visit the conference website. The content for our webinar series is similar as what it would be for an in-person conference. If you have questions, please submit them using the Q&A function in Zoom. We're encouraging attendees to upvote questions. So to upvote a question, you just navigate to the Q&A function in Zoom and click on the thumbs up button. And this will bring the most popular questions to the top of the Q&A window. At the end of the presentation, we'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes answering some of your questions that have not already been answered in the Q&A function in Zoom. Please keep in mind that we do have a very large audience for this session, so we may not be able to answer all of your questions. This session is being recorded, and it will be made available on our website at nsfpolicyoutreach.com in the coming weeks. And we'll send an email announcement to everyone as soon as those sessions are posted. If you have any technical difficulties during this presentation, please submit them in the Q&A and someone will assist you. Thank you for participating in our poll. We're happy and excited that you can join us as this marks NSF's first ever virtual grants conference. We've been conducting these conferences since 1993. They began as small single-day events with a handful of program staff, and over the years, they've grown to 2 full days with 25 to 30 staff, and now a virtual event. We hope that you'll enjoy this session and any of the other sessions that you choose to attend. I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover award management topics at NSF. And this session will be covered by Kandis Boyd and Michael Horneffer from our Division of Grants and Agreements, and Jeff Vieceli from our Division of Institution and Award Support.
Welcome to the Fall 2020 Virtual Grants Conference. This presentation will focus on awards management. Next slide. This presentation will feature Kandis Boyd, Michael Horneffer, and also Jeff Vieceli. I am the Deputy Divisional Director of DGA. Michael Horneffer is the Grants and Agreements Officer in DGA, and Jeff Vieceli is the Systems Administrator and Head of Systems Office in DIAS. Next slide. So today we're going to cover several topics. We will talk about the awards process, award processing delays, post-award notifications and requests, no-cost extensions, award transfers, awardee responsibilities, and keys to success. Next slide. So first, what does DGA and DIAS stand for? DGA stands for the Division of Grants and Agreements, and DIAS stands for the Division of Institution and Award Support. On this slide, you see the mission for both divisions, and that is for DGA to support the issuance of NSF assistance awards and other agreements by providing business, financial, and award administration assistance from pre-award through closeout. The mission of DIAS is to provide sustained excellence in stewardship across the grants life cycle through state-of-the-art business practices and exemplary business assistance to key stakeholders within NSF and across the research community to demonstrate organizational excellence, agility, and innovation in ensuring NSF leadership within the federal R&D enterprise. Next slide. So many of you are familiar with this graphic. This represents the NSF award process. So in a nutshell, we start with proposal preparation and submission, then a program review, and if approved, then the award is submitted to DGA for review. We have 3 branches that process the award. If the award is approved, then we have a grants officer provide approval and an award notice is issued. Next slide. So what kind of awards are issued by DGA? The vast majority of our awards are assistance awards, in which the principal purpose of which is to transfer anything of value from NSF to the grantee for them to carry out a public purpose and not to acquire property or services for NSF's direct benefit or use. In addition to assistance awards, DGA also issues grants, cooperative agreements, and fellowships. Next slide. So how many award actions does DGA process each year? Well, if you look at this slide and add up the numbers, you can see it's on the order of 22,000. And if it's broken down, you see that it is approximately 12,000 new awards each year, approximately 5,000 supplements and continuing grant increments, and approximately 5,000 non-funded actions. Next slide. So what are some common reasons for a delay in award processing? 1, overdue project reports. 2, not following solicitation requirements. 3, missing IRB or IACUC approvals. Or 4, unallowable or unjustified budget items. I'll now turn it over to Jeff to continue our discussion.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to start off, as Kandis mentioned, one of the things that will slow down processing of your proposal are overdue project reports. As you can see, some of the things that happen with overdue project reports is it can affect all of the future funding for that subject award, as well as any associated awards that the PI or co-PIs might be working on as well. So it's not just that one particular award, it's a spider web type of thing where we are looking for those reports to be submitted. We also have, it blocks not only funding, but it also blocks administrative actions. As you also see there, it impacts other PIs or co-PIs. The last bullet there under consequences is under the new uniform guidance, the new 2 CFR 200 that came out August 13th. The NSF as well as other federal agencies will need to start reporting anyone that has overdue final project reports or any reports. After 1 year from the end date of the award, they will be reported to FAPIS, which is the Federal Awardee Procurement Information Integrity System, I believe, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. In terms of the annual and final project reports, they are approved by the program officer, so the submission of the report really isn't the final piece. It really does... the PIs have to submit the reports, but the POs have to approve those, and it's the approval that basically is what clears our system. It's not just submission. Annual project reports are currently due 90 days prior to the end of the budget period, and final project reports are due within basically from the end date of the award through 120 days after the end date of the award. They have to be submitted. If it comes in on the 121st day, it would be considered overdue. In many cases, the overdue project reports really do affect end of the fiscal year processing for DGA. We've had occasions where people have lost out on getting a supplement. Even just this past fiscal year, there were people, there was $1 million that was set to be released, but it couldn't be released because the project had an overdue project report. And that kept that $1 million from being supplemented to that award. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. The project outcomes reports for the general public, the PORs. This is a unique report that is only the National Science Foundation requirement. It's like a final project report. It is also due 120 days after the end date of the award. It is not approved by the program officers, however. It is actually published verbatim by what the PI submits, and we don't really get involved. The NSF doesn't really get involved in the content of those reports. In terms of other information, the NSF does send out reminder notices. We send out the reminder notices when the project reports are due, as well as when they are overdue. Those reminder notices get sent to the PI, as well as all co-PIs, as well as the SRO. The report requirements are available to the PI. If they log into research.gov, the PIs can see their report requirements. The SRO can also run a report that shows them all of the project reports for their portfolio. Only the PI and co-PIs, however, can submit the reports. The SRO does not have any access to submit the reports. And if you're ever in doubt about the project reports, you should contact your program officer and or DGA to get more information or to ask questions. You can also contact the help desk. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. In the PAP guide, there is language, and it is part of NSF policy that basically states that when you submit as the PI or co-PIs, you submit that final project report, and we have similar language for the POR. When you submit those reports, it is an indication that you've completed the entire project. You've done the scope of work for the project. So if you're looking to get a no-cost extension, if you're looking to have a supplement issued, if you're looking to have a PI transfer of the award, don't supply that final project report or the PORs, even if they are overdue. The NSF has mechanisms that allow for those awards, the subject award, to be transferred or get a supplement or get no-cost extensions if they have overdue reports only on that award. So we can handle those situations. I know lots of times program officers tell you to submit the reports and get them in, but unfortunately, once they're submitted, it is an indication that you've completed the award. So it makes it difficult for us to reverse those. And it creates situations where it takes additional time to actually clear the reports. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Basically, these are the warning banner messages that appear in research.gov for the final project report as well as for that POR. Again, this is repeating that same language from the PAP guide. And again, it is that warning that says, more or less, don't submit this report if you're planning to do something or if you have not completed the project. You really should be, as a PI or a co-PI, you really should be in contact with your SRO and making determinations about whether or not you need a no-cost extension or how much money is available on the award and what is left to be performed in terms of the scope. In terms of the NSF policies, if you come in and you say, I have money left over on the award, or there's still money left, that does not equate to you have not completed the project. So in and of itself, having money left does not mean that you're going to get a no-cost extension. It really is about the scope of the project and the work. Has the work been completed? And I think the next slide is Michael.
Thank you, Jeff. So looking at solicitation requirements, DGA reviews each proposal against its applicable program solicitation to ensure that they meet the appropriate compliance requirements. For proposals involving human subjects, proposing organizations are required to conform to 45 CFR 690, and this is the federal-wide policy for the protection of human subjects. For proposals involving vertebrate animal research, proposing organizations are required to comply with the Animal Welfare Act. So now, the most important point here is that if a solicitation or proposal includes human subjects or indicates vertebrate animal research, DGA will verify that the appropriate IRB approval, exemption, or the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, or IACUC, certification has been submitted before the award is made and not after. In cases where you might have a PI with a project that lacks definite plans for overseeing human subjects, you could submit a certification invoking 45 CFR 690.118 and state that no work with human subjects, including recruitment, is allowed to begin until the IRB approval has been obtained. Next slide, please. Proposal budget review is an area where DGA's grants officers typically spend a lot of their time. Some more specific areas of concern where we look are the participant support and other direct cost categories. For participant support, you'll want to pay attention to the definition of participant support costs, which is included in the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, where that acronym is the PAPG. The definition is restrictive and controls the sorts of activities and items that you could cover using participant support funds. So here, you want to be careful not to embed unallowables. In other direct costs, DGA tends to scrutinize the subaward and other categories. For subawards, or budget line item G5, you'll want to make sure that a separate subaward budget is included as part of the proposal budget. DGA will not authorize a subaward arrangement that doesn't have the separate breakdown of subaward costs. For other, or budget line item G6, it's important to disaggregate and list what's being funded in this category. For instance, if your G6 costs include tuition remission, lab fees, and software licenses, you'll want to itemize and list the costs for each of those requests. Next slide, please. Looking at indirect costs, you'll want to make sure that you're applying your most recently negotiated indirect cost rate agreement schedule. And that's the agreement that was in effect at the time of proposal submission. You should also adhere to that specific agreement and schedule over the award's period of performance. So, if you have a supplemental fund request in an out performance year, you should apply the original negotiated indirect cost rate agreement to that budget. For budget justifications, these shouldn't go for more than 5 pages, and each line item should be addressed. And typically, we see narrative descriptions for each budget category included in the justification. Lastly, all funding requests should be in congruence with your organization's policies and procedures, as well as your organization's cost accounting methodology. In other words, you shouldn't request funding in a manner that your own organization wouldn't support. Next slide, please. So here are a few of the typical questions that DGA receives. We had talked about participant support costs, and please remember to carefully check what you're requesting to be covered by this cost category. You should also keep in mind that removing or rebudgeting funds out of the participant support cost category on a post-award basis requires prior approval from NSF. For subaward requests submitted on a post-award basis, these have to be submitted through FastLane and they have to have a DUNS number. You should also keep in mind the award management and oversight provisions flow down to your subaward organizations. So you'll have to conduct your own monitoring and oversight activities to ensure that your subawardee organizations are compliant with NSF policy. For award closeout, for the most part, NSF has automated this process. However, if an award contains a special term or condition, or if some certain reporting requirement needs to be filled prior to closeout, and here, for instance, an example would be if an award has cost share reports that need to be submitted, DGA will work with the program office and you to make sure that these are fulfilled before authorizing the closeout. Next slide, please. So this is the Research Terms and Conditions Appendix A. We included only one page here, and I believe that there are 4 pages, but the document includes a list of restricted categories that require NSF's prior approval. In some instances, you'll have a prior approval category that NSF has waived, such as for the rebudgeting of requests between direct cost categories that exceed 10%. For a category like this, NSF has vested unilateral rebudgeting authority with its awardee institutions. And this is also a great resource to have on hand, and it's publicly facing and available on the NSF DIAS policy webpage. Next slide, please. If your PI or co-PI has to leave the project for more than 3 months, and for instance, for personal reasons, or if she or he is taking a sabbatical, you as the authorized organizational representative should submit a prior approval request through research.gov. Going back to the previous slide, long-term disengagement requests are another restricted cost category in the research terms and conditions that require prior approval from NSF. So it's important that you track what your senior project personnel are doing to avoid the possibility of award termination for non-compliance. Nobody wants that. Next slide, please. Just to further add to our participant support cost discussion, again, participant support's another restricted category in the research terms and conditions prior approval matrix. But there are also some caveats to this category that you'll want to pay close attention to. First, moving or rebudgeting funding out of the participant support cost category requires prior approval from NSF. And specifically, that approval should come from your cognizant NSF program officer. The second is that while moving funds into the participant support cost category generally does not require prior approval from NSF, if a rebudgeting action transfers funds into the other cost category of participant support, and this category can be seen on NSF standard budget forms, in this case, NSF prior approval will be required from DGA. And the reason for this we touched on before, but NSF requires a prior approval review to transfer funds into the other participant support cost category so that the grants officer can determine if the funding request is allowable. I'll now hand it back to Jeff to discuss no-cost extensions.
Okay. As Michael said, I'm going to talk a little bit about no-cost extensions. I already mentioned a little bit about no-cost extensions whenever I was talking about overdue project reports. The first thing that I want to talk about with no-cost extensions is, again, a reminder. A no-cost extension is not, I have money left on my project, therefore I'm going to get a no-cost extension. If you write that into your justification for a no-cost extension, it will be declined. It will be returned to you. And again, it is about the scope of the project. It is the work that's being done. I haven't completed the work that I said I was going to do, therefore I need more time. It is not based upon the money. That is a federal, it's in the Uniform Guidance policy as well as an NSF policy. So some of the other things about no-cost extensions, we will not extend an award that has a zero balance. Again, if you've spent all of the money, there is no more project. That project is done. The awards cannot be Again, I've already mentioned the second bullet. Again, it's not about the expending of funds. It is about the scope of work. Grantee approved no-cost extensions need to come in 10 days, at least 10 days prior to the end date of the award. If you come in on the 8th day, you will not be able to submit that grantee approved no-cost extension. You're going to get an error message. And research.gov has actually been programmed that it will automatically select what type of no-cost extension you're going to be eligible for based upon our rules. As you can also see, NSF-approved no-cost extensions need to come in at 45 days prior to the end date, and that is to give the program officer enough time to completely review the no-cost extension request and look at other circumstances behind the award to see if they are going to approve that no-cost extension. In most cases, the first NSF-approved no-cost extension is approved by the program officer, and subsequent NSF-approved no-cost extensions are approved by the Division of Grants and Agreements, or grants officer. You can submit the NSF-approved no-cost extensions late, but you will be forced to enter a reason. You have to explain why. Why did I miss this 45-day window? We also verify once you actually get the no-cost extension, you will either get an amendment letter from DGA saying that it's been extended, or you'll get an email back from the program officer. And if you do a grantee approved no-cost extension, you get an email back basically from research.gov. Once you get one of those things, the emails and or the amendment letter, you want to go back into Fastlane and you just want to double check that the end date has actually been extended to what you believe it was going to be. You can also check the end date in iTrack, or not iTrack, I'm sorry, in research.gov under the ACMS, the accounts cash management service. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. You may or may not know this, but NSF money is not good forever. Our appropriations actually expire. So when we make you an award, and basically 6 years after we make you that award, those funds cancel. They go away. The NSF doesn't even control that. The U.S. Treasury controls that. So you only have a certain amount of time in which you can actually expend those funds. So the NSF tries to help you stay on track with expending those funds. We will send you, if we get to basically the 5th year and you have not expended what we believe to be enough of the funds, and you will have funds that will cancel and will be taken away from you, we will send an email to the SRO to let them know that these funds are out there and they are scheduled to cancel at the end of that fiscal year. I believe we now start sending those emails in December, and we follow back up again several times throughout the year so that we don't get to a situation where it's September 20th and those funds are going to cancel and you're caught unprepared. We don't want that to happen, and I don't think you want that to happen. So we try to communicate with you that those funds are going to cancel, that you do need to draw down funds. However, the drawdown is not, again, just to draw down funds. It has to be to cover your expenses. So you have to have expenses to cover the drawdowns. If an auditor came in and you said, oh, well, we got this email that told us we needed to draw down funds, so we drew down funds, they're not going to really take that as any sort of an excuse. They're going to say, but the drawdown had to be to recoup expenses or to pay you back. The other last point here is that research.gov, if you come in to do a no-cost extension, you will get a message on the screen that shows you there is canceling appropriation on this award. We are not going to allow you to extend this award beyond the canceling appropriation. So if we go ahead to the next screen, This is that error message that you would see in research.gov. If I went out to an award that had canceling appropriation and I tried to, the appropriation cancels at the end of the fiscal year, which would be September 30th of whatever fiscal year it is. If I tried to extend and supply and input a no-cost extension with an end date of, we'll say, October 31st of that fiscal year, I would get this error message basically telling me you're exceeding the canceling appropriation. You need to basically take this back. You can go through September 30th, but I would point out to you that generally, the last few years, because NSF has changed our accounting system, we are closing out for awardee drawdowns, usually around the 23rd or 24th of September. So you would need to come in to the NSF and do a final drawdown in accordance with that closeout date. So you couldn't come in on September 27th and try to do a drawdown because our financial accounting system is down for the fiscal year. So there are a lot of moving pieces with that canceling appropriation. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. Grant transfers, award transfers, PI transfers, however you want to refer to it. Again, there are a lot of questions that pop up about our transfer process. While we call it and refer to it as a PI transfer, it is really an award transfer. It is transferring an award from one organization to another organization. And as you can read, the first point up here is that the grants are made to the awardee and not to the PI. So it is the awardee's decision as to what happens with that award. So if a PI goes to the awardee and says, I took another job, or I'm leaving and I want to take my grant with me, the awardee organization basically has these four things that they can do. They can actually keep the award themselves and nominate a new PI. They can request to actually do a sub-award with the PI's new organization and still, again, keep that award. They can agree to transfer the award to the new organization, or they can actually choose to terminate the award altogether. Basically, for any of these situations, there should really be conversation between the NSF and the program office, as well as the grants officers. So again, you want to make sure that there's communication. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. Some additional things to remember about award transfers, PI transfers. For a career award, really the only options are number three and number 4 from the previous slide, because we can't nominate a new PI because the career award was actually granted to a specific PI. So the old awardee can't just replace that PI. The original award, if the original award included EPSCoR funds, which is the established program to stimulate competitive research, if it was made and it had EPSCoR funds, and now the PI is moving to a state that is not a recognized EPSCoR state, we cannot transfer those funds to the new award. Fastlane will allow you to include that in your transfer requests, but when it comes to DGA, DGA will actually get error messages and they won't be able to actually approve that. So you have to be aware of, again, whether you're in an EPSCoR state or a non-EPSCoR state and the transfer back and forth. We can transfer anything to an EPSCoR state. We just can't transfer money that's EPSCoR funds from an EPSCoR state to a non-EPSCoR state. The last point here is very important. Do a reconciliation before you do your PI transfer, your award transfer. Make sure that you are transferring the correct amount of money. I would look at whether or not you have all of your bills from your sub-awardees. If you have sub-awardees, I would make sure that you have all of your invoices from your equipment taken care of. I would make sure that you've accounted for any of your payroll that you have not yet input into the system and done a drawdown if you are the original organization. Because once NSF approves and makes that transfer, we don't have a way of transferring money back and saying, oh, yeah, you forgot to include this $5,000 piece of equipment. Let's give you back $5,000. We don't have that mechanism. So again, the reconciliation and making sure that all the numbers are correct is very important. And it's just a step that I would include in my process. So let's go ahead to the next slide. We also, sort of changing gears here a little bit, the NSF has been involved in a multi-year project to upgrade our awards management system. As we move to the new award management system, we did take the opportunity to change our award notices. You're all probably very familiar with our new format. We implemented the first change for no-cost extensions, went out in March of 2018. We then continued with various other pieces. So you've been seeing these award notices. It gave us the opportunity to standardize, streamline, and simplify our award notices. It also is helping us make sure that we are in compliance with uniform guidance as well as other policies and procedures. It created an easy-to-read layout that is broken up into various sections and is easy to identify the pieces of information on the award and the award notice. It takes advantage of new technology. That's more for the NSF, as well as, again, that it puts us into a position to utilize new technology better. Again, that's more for the NSF, but it does help the grantee community in the long run, because if it takes less time for DGA to process an award, it's faster for them to get those awards out on the street and to the external community. And that was one of our goals as well. The other big thing here, as you'll see, is we did take the opportunity. We are now CCing the PIs and co-PIs on the award notices. If I could hear a big woo-hoo in the crowd, I'm sure I would. This is something that the community had been asking for a while, and we were not able to do that under our old technology, and we are now able to do that. So as of March of 2018 and all of the other award notices that we moved over, they are now CCing PIs and co-PIs. So we can move to the next slide, please. That leads me to the next slide here, and that has to do with PI transfers, award transfers, which we've already talked a little bit about. We are scheduled to release in the end of November of this year, 2020, the new PI transfer award notices. Again, they keep that same sort of general format and look and feel of the other notifications. This is the last award notice that we needed to upgrade. So at this point in time, when we move this out in November, everything in terms of a DGA, grants officer approval, will be in the new format. We still have things in the old legacy award system, but it is not anything that has anything to do with approvals or the award notices. We have additional plans to make a few tweaks to some of our notices, including PI transfer notices. And the last thing that I will mention is that this is not a redo of the PI transfer submission and processing process. This is really just the award notice at this time. At some point in time, we will be relooking at the PI transfer process when it moves from Fastlane into research.gov, but we don't really have a scheduled time frame for that. And let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And I believe this is Michael again.
Thank you, Jeff. We're now going to pivot to NSF monitoring activities. NSF has a number of tools at its disposal to monitor the progress of its projects. DGA's program officer counterparts engage in programmatic site visits to examine the technical and scientific progress being made on the projects. DGA and DIAS also have their own site visit tool, and this is called the Advanced Monitoring Program. We use advanced monitoring to examine the financial and business aspects of the project. The goal of our review is to identify areas where a grantee organization could potentially improve its grant administration practices. We also incorporate any compliance or performance-related issues brought to our attention by the NSF program officers so that we could better tailor our visits. Next slide, please. We had spoken a little bit about FAPIS, but looking at it now, NSF is required by the Uniform Guidance to report award terminations on the FAPIS website, and we're also required to review FAPIS before issuing new awards. The intent of the FAPIS-related regulation is to hold award recipients accountable and also to share award performance across federal agencies. This is essentially aimed at promoting results-oriented grant-making. Awardee organizations are also required to self-report certain proceedings to FAPIS. And just to discuss some recent updates to the FAPIS site, 2 CFR 200.344 now requires that NSF report in FAPIS any recipient who has failed to submit all required project reports within 1 year of an award's period of performance and end date. This would include annual reports, final reports, project outcome reports, and any other reports that may be required for closeout in accordance with the specific terms and conditions of the NSF award. Next, Kandis will wrap us up with some keys to success.
Thank you, Michael. So, what are some ways that you can be successful? First, comply with all relevant federal regulations and national policy requirements. Next, adhere to the terms and conditions of an NSF award. Read your award notice carefully. It may include project or award-specific requirements such as funding restrictions, special reporting requirements, and special terms and conditions or other instructions. Next slide. Make sure the award has an active PI. Manage your funds prudently. Make sure the funds are allowable, allocable, reasonable, and necessary. Track report requirements and establish appropriate policies and procedures as well as oversight and internal controls. Next slide. Train your staff so they understand their roles and responsibilities. Be consistent and maintain timely and effective lines of communications. Know who to contact if you have, know who to contact for relevant information. So in general, PIs, you can contact your NSF program officer for technical or specific questions. You can contact your SRO for administrative questions. If you are an SRO, you can contact the DGA portfolio manager for award-specific conditions. Always remember to include the award number in any email or communication to assist DGA with responding to your inquiry promptly. SROs can also contact the NSF Policy Office with general grant policy questions. Next slide. Ask early and ask often. So again, thank you so much for participating in today's award management discussion. And if you have further questions, you can contact the NSF Division of Financial Management for questions related to payment, financial policy, financial reporting, and ACMS. Follow research.gov and FastLane direction and edits. Make sure that you read error messages received in research.gov and FastLane and take screenshots to include in emails that you send to the help desk or to the PO. Remember to submit sub-recipient information to the Federal Subaward Reporting System. And for questions regarding research.gov, you can contact the help desk at 1-800-381-1532. For FastLane questions, you can contact 1-800-673-6188. And also on this slide, we have listed both the websites for the Policy Office as well as the DGA website. So thank you again for joining us today, and we will now open the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you all. And we've been getting a lot of questions come in, and we're going to try and get to a number of them. And I'll say right off the bat, we probably won't get to all of your questions. We've tried to answer some of them as we've been going. What I would recommend is that you do take a look at I put into the chat some links to the NSF proposal and award frequently asked questions. A lot of the questions that have been asked in this session can be found, the answers can be found in that document. So I would recommend that you go to that. And in addition to that, there are a lot of other document sets of frequently asked questions that I hope will be of use to you. What I'd like to do, and we've got quite a few questions, try and I guess group some of them, but we got a lot of questions about no-cost extensions and PI transfers. But before we get to that, I have a question asking us, how would the principal investigator know if a proposal was declined after the merit and program review of that, and then after DGA's review, if it has to be declined for administrative reasons? I'll send that over to Michael.
Yes, so if I'm understanding the question correctly, the participant wants to know how they would receive notice of a declination if DGA was to decline for financial and administrative reasons.
That's how I understood the question, right?
Yes, they would receive official notification from DGA, and it's also within their right to request a debrief, and the grants officer and typically the branch chief would participate in that call.
Right. So following up on that question, what are some of the reasons why a proposal might be administrative declined by DGA, even though it had received high approval ratings in the review panel and then recommended for award by the program?
That's a really good question. So even if a proposal merit reviews very well, that is, it receives high marks on the programmatic side, it could still be declined for financial or administrative reasons. And some of these reasons could include an inadequacy of financial or administrative systems, some kind of repeated material non-compliance, or otherwise significant failure to adhere to the applicable NSF policies.
Okay, we have quite a few questions about no-cost extensions. One, I guess, Jeff, if you want to talk a little bit about the difference between the NSF approved and the awardee approved no cost extensions, and then we have some very specific questions about, for example, if you submit a no cost, when should you submit that no cost extension? Should you do it as soon as you determine you need it, or should it be a certain time period out from when? From say 6 months or so. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. In terms of the grantee approved no cost extensions and NSF approved no cost extensions, it's already built into research.gov. So if you are eligible for that grantee approved no cost extension, research.gov will let you know that, and it will have you prepare that type of no cost extension. What the grantee approved no cost extension is, it is a one-time up to 12 months approval just based upon the awardee organization saying we need this no cost extension. There is no review by the NSF, although the program officers do get a courtesy copy so that they do know that you've extended the award, but it is not reviewed or approved by the NSF. It is all based upon the awardee. It must be submitted at least 10 days prior to the original end date of the award for it to be the grantee approved no cost extension. As I mentioned during the presentation, if it comes in on the 8th day, it will automatically flip you to the NSF approved no cost extension. So the NSF approved no cost extensions require NSF review and approval, whether that be by a program officer or by a grants officer. So In terms of whether or not, I know there was another question about whether they can be submitted late or not. Yes, you can certainly submit them after the end date of the award. You just have to explain why you did not get that no cost extension submitted on time.
There was another question asking about canceling appropriations and no cost extensions as well. If there's a 6-year limit on the funds, but you have a 5-year award, how does that work?
Right. Again, we have edits built into research.gov. So if you went into, and again, as part of the presentation, you saw that slide. If you go into research.gov and you request a no cost extension that would extend the award beyond that canceling appropriation date, you'll actually get an error message, a warning message. You will not be able to submit the no cost extension. In fact, I just had one yesterday where someone got that error message and we told them that they needed to change the date to September 30th of 2021. And when they did that, they were able to submit their no cost extension. They had originally wanted to extend it to December of 2021, but December 2021 would be beyond the canceling appropriation date. So we've tried to build many of these business rules and edits into the system so that we help you when you're filling out your no cost extension request. You'll see various error messages or warning messages. Read those error messages and warning messages, and they should give you an indication of what you'll need to do to clear that issue. So.
Okay, great. We may have some more no-cost extension questions coming as I'm scrolling through here, and I'll come back to those. I have a question about new organizations, Michael. The question is, how, if you've never received NSF funding before, how do new organizations become eligible to be a recipient of NSF funds? And what is the process then for that taking place?
Absolutely. I'd also like to add the caveat that NSF classifies organizations as new or naive to NSF funding if they haven't received any NSF funding within the past 5 years. So there's, NSF has a new performer financial viability review processes that it uses to assess these sort of organizations that are classified as new or naive to NSF funding. That process involves an assessment of their financial and administrative systems, as well as their policies and procedures for the areas related to grants management and accounting.
Okay. I'm sorry, were you going to add something there before I moved on?
Yes. So that review is done in concert with our colleagues in the Division of Institution and Award Support by cost analysts.
Great. So we have a number of questions on reports, and kind of going to combine two of these, and either one of you or anybody who would like to take this question. Do you have suggestions when a program officer seems to be taking a little bit of time to approve a report? What should the PI or co-PI do in that case? And then also, could you talk a bit about reports for collaborative awards, and how that works, and who's required to submit what?
Right. I can take this one, Jeremy. In terms of if you've submitted a project report, per NSF internal policy, program officers have 90 days basically to do their review and approval of those reports. So if you've submitted a report, again, you're looking at research.gov and you see the due date or the overdue date of that report is September 30th, 2020, and you submitted that report on September 28th, 2020. The PO has 90 days per NSF internal policy to review that. So they may not get to that before September 30th. So you should keep that in mind. But if it does seem like they've had it for a while, that they've had it for more than 90 days, you can certainly reach out to the program officer. They do get notices in their mailboxes, their in-mail. It is highly likely that on occasion those emails get buried. Someone's on vacation or they are in a panel and they may not even have noticed that they've gotten that email. So feel free to follow up with the PO to say, I submitted a report. Do you know what the status is? In terms of collaboratives, the NSF has two different types of collaborative proposals. We have collaboratives that is just a normal award that has subawards. We consider that to be a collaborative proposal. We also have what we consider the separately submitted collaborative proposals, so that everyone that is involved in the project is getting their own reports. These would be handled differently. If it is an award with subawards, all the reporting requirements are for the prime awardee. So the prime would be the one who is submitting the report and is responsible for submitting the report. There is only one report in that respect in terms of an annual progress report, a final progress report. For the separately submitted collaborative proposals, everyone is getting their own award. So all of the PIs on those separate awards would be responsible for submitting their reports separately. If, as a group, you wanted to collaborate and submit basically the same reports, the NSF would accept that, but you really should be reporting on your piece of the project, and everybody is responsible for their own reports at the moment. And in terms of the content of the reports, you should always reach out to your POs to find out exactly what it is that they're looking for. Because some POs and some programs have different requirements, even though we have one standard format, the RPPR format. So.
Right, and oftentimes the program solicitation to which you originally submitted your proposal to will have some clarifying language on what should be included in those reports. Right. Following up on that, we have a question asking about FAPIS and when overdue reports would be reported to FAPIS. Is it after they're overdue for a year after the award has ended that they'll be reported, or is it just as soon as they're overdue?
I will take that one again. We are still working on exactly what the FAPIS reporting really means to us. OMB has not yet provided all of the final guidance. We just know that we will have to. As of right now, we believe that the requirement is strictly for the end of the project. So the end date is September 30, 2020. If you have not supplied your requisite project reports by September 30 of 2021, we would have to report you to FAPIS. So it is not currently scheduled to be in the life of the 5-year life of the award. You have an overdue project report, we're going to report you to FAPIS. It is strictly based upon the end of the award.
Great. We have a question about subawards, and the question is asking if a subaward can be issued to an individual who does not have an organizational affiliation, and if the answer is no, how should that be handled? I'll throw that over to Michael.
So that's correct. NSF does not issue awards to individuals. We have dealt with this sort of instance before, and what we've done is they could affiliate with an existing awardee institution that NSF supports. That is one option. I believe that they could be also funded in a different way on the budget. So for instance, if they're not going to be the direct recipient of NSF funds, it could be funded as a consultant. And to that end, they could be issued a consulting contract or arrangement. And that would be executed by a primary awardee organization, and they would in turn manage that individual via contract through the consulting arrangement.
Thank you. We have some questions about award transfers, a number of different questions about award transfers. And I know, Jeff, you touched on this earlier, but so can you talk about how long it takes to transfer an award from the original university to a new institution? And then how is the whole financial transaction work? If you can go into a little bit of more detail about that.
Okay, I can jump in with that one again. What ends up happening, PI transfers, I've seen PI transfers that took a week, and I've seen PI transfers that have taken a year. It really all depends on how quickly the two organizations can come to an agreement on, that's the first part of it. The two organizations need to agree how much money is going to be transferred to the new awardee. And once that documentation is supplied and submitted to the NSF and it comes through, DGA can get those approved fairly quickly. Where we come into issues is when there is negotiations that are taking place about when is the start date for the PI, when is their end date, how much money is going to be transferred. NSF doesn't really get involved in all those negotiations. We've had instances where the PI has contacted us and said, yeah, my two organizations can't agree on my transfer. Can you help? And we really can't, unfortunately. In terms of the money, as I mentioned during the presentation, I would do the reconciliation before I start really deciding, because the two organizations have to decide if there was $100,000 left in the award, whether all $100,000 is being transferred to the new award, or whether the old awardee believes that they may have some additional expenses, such as, a subaward invoice, an equipment invoice, something that had not been paid that might come up, and they want to be sure that they're holding back enough funds to cover those. Because again, once those funds are transferred from the old organization to the new organization, NSF will not go back and somehow or another make the old organization whole if they transferred too much. Same thing happens if they end up transferring $80,000 and they don't need all $20,000 that they may have kept back. There's no second way for them to transfer any remaining funds to the new awardee. So it really is something that needs to be negotiated and looked at. And sometimes it does take a long time to get those through. So it really all depends on the circumstances.
Okay, we have a couple of questions about participant support costs. And I'm just going to combine these two questions to make it a two-part question. The first part is, could graduate students who are paid by the university be allowed to be considered in participant support costs? And two, what types of costs are typically included in the other participant support cost section? And I'll send that over to Michael.
That's a great question. So the first part of that would be driven by the awardee institution, and the determining factor would be the employment status of the graduate students in this hypothetical. For instance, years ago when I was a graduate student, I was funded out of the Roberts Wood Johnson Foundation grant, but I was classified as an employee of George Mason University. If I was to be classified under participant support, I would not be eligible to be funded out of that category because of my employment status with the university. So the first part of the question, again, it really is up the institution and their classification of the participant that drives whether or not that person can receive participant support cost funds. The second part of that, could I have that again?
Sure. It was about the types of participant support costs that are found in the other category of participant support.
Absolutely. So I can say that we scrutinize these. We work, for instance, with our program officer to determine allowability for the other cost category and participant support on a case-by-case basis. It would be driven essentially by the nature of the project, the sort of training activity that's being conducted. So again, it would be on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, we're coming back here. Let's see. Here's a question on indirect cost rates. And the question is there a difference in the usage of the approved indirect cost rate at the time of the award through the life of the award for institutions of higher education and nonprofit organizations that have annual indirect rates that change?
Another great question. So the way that NSF operates is The negotiated indirect cost rate agreement that was approved upon funding obligation, that initial rate schedule is what we expect our awardee institutions to adhere to over the course of the performance period of the award. So to answer the question directly, if you're an institution that receives a newly negotiated indirect cost rate agreement on an annual basis, we would not expect you to submit rebudgeting requests to accommodate those new rate schedules. We would expect that you adhere to the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement that was in effect at the time of award obligation, funding obligation.
I'm going to go back to a question about expiring funds. And the question is saying that somebody had heard at another conference that awards needed to be spent out by 7 years. So the question is, what is it? Is it 6 years or 7 years? Can you explain that a little bit?
It is generally 6 years. Our funding is good for 5 years. So we generally get 2 years to expend the funds, but it is generally 6 years. And again, we have business rules and edits that are automatically in the system and will alert you to any canceling appropriations, as well as we do send out emails to people if the funds are about to cancel. So.
Okay. Going back to no-cost extensions for a bit, on a collaborative proposal, when the lead institution asks for a no-cost extension, should all of the collaborating institutions also request a no-cost extension?
It really depends. You can, or it depends on the project. If you are part of the project and you've completed what you needed to do and you do not need that no-cost extension, you do not need to get a no-cost extension if it is a separately submitted collaborative proposal because you have your own award. There is nothing at the NSF that requires the lead and non-leads to have the same expiration date. So it really depends on the individual project and your work involved in that project.
Okay, we've got time for a couple of more questions. A question going back to indirect costs or F&A. So for supplements, in what case can the grantee use their current negotiated F&A rate versus the original F&A rate on supplements?
Again, I would reiterate what I mentioned previously. With supplemental or out-year funding, we would still expect that the awarding institution would adhere to the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement that was in effect at the time of the initial obligation. So supplemental funding requests should follow, and it should be included in the budget. It should follow that originally negotiated rate. So whatever that rate schedule was at the initial time.
Okay, and another question on subrecipients. The questioner is asking if subaward recipients go through the same process for approval of their financial systems and policies as the prime organizations.
I'm sorry, would that, is the question, are subawardee organizations assessed for new performer viability?
Correct, by NSF.
So the answer is no. Again, the caveat to that would be we would expect that the primary organization would act as a responsible steward and the applicable NSF policies would flow down to the subrecipient. The monitoring of that subrecipient, those sort of activities that go into oversight would be conducted by the primary awarding institution.
Okay, a question, and this will be our final question for this session, and this is again going back to award transfers. On an award transfer, if you realize that the budget justification is missing after you've sent the request to NSF, how can you fix this error besides NSF rejecting the process and having to start all over again?
Yeah, currently PI transfers do not support revised budgets or proposal file updates. Hopefully at some point in time, I did answer another question about PI transfers. We will be moving the PI transfer functionality from Fastlane to research.gov. Hopefully when we make that switch, we will fix some of the known issues or some of the, I don't want to say that they're problems, but that's what they are. Some of the problems with the current process. Hopefully we will address that when we do move them. But currently, I'm not sure. It really comes down to what DGA will accept. In some cases, you could probably just submit the revised budget justification as an email attachment. It could be uploaded to the eJacket, our internal proposal jacket record, and the program office could continue that way. And either that or yes, the process would require the proposal to basically be rejected and sent back and start over.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of our presenters, Kandis and Michael and Jeffrey, for doing this today. I want to thank all of you for attending. I realize we couldn't get to all of your questions today, but I do recommend checking out the frequently asked questions that we put in the chat. And you'll be able to view this presentation on the conference website, including the video and the presentation itself, and we'll certainly let you know when that's all available. So thank you again for attending, and I hope you'll be able to attend some of the other sessions that we have this week and the week of November 30th. Thanks again, and take care.